My name is Tessa Brennan, and 3 weeks ago, my older sister stood up at her own rehearsal dinner in front of 80 people and read from my private journal. She thought she was destroying me. She didn't know I had been writing in a decoy for 8 months. She didn't know the real journal was sitting in her maid of honor's clutch, 2 seats down from where she was standing. And she didn't know that the maid of honor was about to get up, cross the room, and end the wedding before the soup course was even cleared. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to tell you who taught me how to keep a second of everything important. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from tonight, whether you're folding laundry, driving home, or just lying in the dark trying to wind down. Now let me take you back to the spring. I was 12 years old when my father said something to me in the garage that I didn't understand for almost 20 years. I'm Tessa Brennan. I'm 29. I'm a paralegal at a small estate law firm in Greenfield, Indiana, and the story I'm about to tell you is the reason I sleep through the night again. My dad was named Conrad. Everyone called him Connie except my mother, who called him Con, and my sister Sloane, who called him Daddy, in a voice so high it always made me look twice to see if she was joking. He worked maintenance at the high school for 31 years, and on weekends he restored old aluminum fishing boats in the garage behind our house on Mulberry Street. Not for money, for peace. He liked the smell of marine varnish and the sound of his sander against soft metal, and he liked having a reason to stand quietly in one place with his hands busy and his face pointed away from the kitchen. My mother, Rita, was loud and warm and exhausting in the way that some women are when they spent their 20s being told they were too much. She ran a small in-home daycare out of our finished basement until I was in high school, and she loved Sloane the way you love a sunrise, like it was something special that arrived just for her. I don't say that with bitterness. It's just true. Sloane was her firstborn, her pretty one, her clever one. I was the one who looked like Daddy. The spring, I was 12. Sloane was 16, and going through what my mother called a phase. It mostly involved Sloane stealing things from my room and then accusing me of being paranoid when I noticed they were gone. A bracelet from my grandma Maeve. A folded note from a boy named Theo in my math class. A small ceramic bird my dad had bought me at a yard sale in Brown County. Each time, Sloane would look me right in the face and say, "Sweetie, you always misplace things. You're so disorganized." And my mother would sigh and tell me to go look in my closet again. That spring, I had started keeping a diary. It was a cheap drugstore notebook with a cartoon kitten on the front, and it lived under my pillow because I didn't have a lock on my door. I wrote in it every night. Boring 12-year-old things. Theo's hands, the smell of the cafeteria pizza on Wednesdays, the way Mrs. Patel said my name in homeroom. And then, one Friday afternoon, my entire 7th grade class spent 20 minutes laughing at a passage Sloane had read aloud at her own friend's sleepover the night before. Word got around fast. I went home and I cried in the garage. I didn't go to my room because I knew Sloane was in there. I went out the back door and sat on the cold concrete next to my dad's workbench. He was bent over the hull of a 1972 Sears Game Fisher, sanding the rail with a soft block. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just handed me a clean shop towel and kept working. After a long time, he set the sander down. He wiped his hands on his jeans. He said, "Tessie, look at me." His eyes were the same gray as the boat. He said, "Sweetheart, in this life, always keep two of everything important. One that people can find, one that they can't." Then he picked up the sander and started in on the rail again, and we didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about diaries. I thought he was telling me to hide my notebook better. So that night, I bought a second notebook from the drugstore on the corner of Main and Pearson, identical to the first, and I started writing meaningless things in the one under my pillow and the real things in the new one, which I taped to the underside of my dresser drawer. Sloane stole the pillow notebook within a month. She read the meaningless things at her next sleepover. Nothing happened. The other notebook stayed safe. I thought my dad had taught me a trick about sisters. It would be another 17 years before I understood that he had been teaching me a trick about life. I want to skip ahead now to 2 years ago, the summer my dad died. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. My mother was destroyed in the way she is destroyed by everything, which is loudly and in front of an audience. My sister was destroyed in the way Sloane is destroyed by everything, which is to say she wasn't, but she wore black and she dabbed her eyes at the right moments and she said the right things to the visitors who came through with casseroles. I was the one in the recliner next to my dad's bed for the last 3 weeks. I was the one who learned to administer the morphine drops. I was the one who washed his face with a warm cloth on the morning he died, and I was the one who closed his eyes when a hospice nurse, a woman named Patrice with kind hands and a small gold cross around her neck, told me it was time. The morning of the funeral, Sloane wore a black sheath dress that she had bought new for the occasion. She wore her hair in a low chignon. She wore jean nete on her wrists because that was Mom's perfume from 1976, and she said it would be comforting. At the reception in the church basement, with the rented coffee urns and the platters of grocery store cookies, I watched my sister stand beside my dad's friend Marcus Hayes, a man she had only met twice in her life, at our parents' Christmas parties, and I watched her put her hand on his forearm and leave it there for 45 seconds. I noticed because I notice things. I'm a paralegal. I read documents for a living. I notice when a margin shifts by a quarter inch. I noticed Marcus's hand land on the small of Sloane's back just for a second, just long enough to be a habit. I noticed that he did not flinch when she leaned into him. I noticed that his fiancée, a woman named Brielle, whom he had been engaged to for 2 years, was nowhere in the room. I went home that night to my apartment above the bakery on Walnut Street, and I took out a slim black leather journal that had been sitting unused in a drawer since law school graduation. It had gold corners and lined pages. I wrote, on the first page, in careful blue ink, August 7th, 2022, the day we buried Daddy. Sloane and Marcus in the church basement for 45 seconds. I closed the journal. I walked to my bookshelf. I pulled down a hardcover copy of Anne of Green Gables that my grandma Maeve had given me for my 8th birthday. The center had been hollowed out years ago by me when I was 13 and going through a phase of my own. I slid the journal into the hollow. I put the book back on the shelf between The Secret Garden and A Wrinkle in Time. I made a cup of black coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. And I waited to see what my sister would do next. She did exactly what I knew she would do. Within 4 months, Marcus's 2-year engagement to Brielle was off, citing differences. Within 7 months, Marcus and Sloane were casually dating. Within a year, they were engaged. And every single step of the way, my sister told the same story to anyone who would listen. She and Marcus had connected over their shared grief about my father. They had bonded at the funeral. It was unexpected. It was a gift in a hard time. Daddy would have loved it. I want to be very precise about something. I never confronted her. I never told my mother. I never said a word to Marcus or to Brielle or to anyone in our extended family. I did 3 things instead. I kept writing in the black journal in the hollowed-out book. I kept screenshots of every Instagram post my sister made about Marcus with date. And I started leaving a second journal. A fake one, identical in size and binding, in the top drawer of my nightstand, where my sister would absolutely find it the next time she came over to borrow something. She found it within 6 weeks. I knew because she came to dinner at my mother's house the following Sunday and she made a comment about a guy I had supposedly written about. She framed it as concern. She said, "Tessie, are you sure this Logan person is good for you? You sound a little obsessed." I had never written about anyone named Logan. There was no Logan. I had invented him specifically because I knew Sloane would not be able to resist mentioning him. My mother frowned at me across the table and said, "What Logan? Why don't I know about a Logan?" And Sloane gave me the look she had been giving me my whole life. The look that says, "I just made you smaller, and there's nothing you can do about it." I smiled. I said, "Oh, he's just someone from the office. It's not serious." And I cut my pot roast into smaller pieces. I want to give you 3 more pieces because I want you to understand what kind of woman my sister is, and I want you to understand it the way you would understand it if you grew up in the same house with her. The first piece is from a Sunday in late September of that first fall, about 3 months after Marcus and Sloane went public. My mother had us all over for chili. My sister wore a cream cashmere sweater and the gold horseshoe necklace my grandma Maeve had left to me, specifically to me, in her will in 2018. I had not seen the necklace in about 7 months. I had assumed I had misplaced it. When I asked her about it, in the kitchen, away from Marcus, she touched it lightly with 2 fingers and said, "Oh, sweetie, this old thing? Mom said I could have it. I look better in gold than you do anyway. You're more of a silver with your coloring." She said it with the soft, smiling voice she uses for things that are supposed to be compliments. I did not say anything. I helped my mother with the cornbread. I made a note in the black journal that night. The second piece is from a Tuesday in November, Marcus's birthday. Sloane threw him a small dinner party at her condo, the one Reginald Hayes had co-signed the down payment on. She invited 11 people. She did not invite me. When my mother asked her why, in front of me, at her own house the following weekend, my sister said, "Mom, Tessie has been so busy with work, I didn't want to put her in a position where she would feel obligated. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed? She shuts down. It's not personal." She said it in front of me, about me, as if I was not in the room. My mother said, "Oh, that's so thoughtful of you." I drank my coffee. I said nothing. I made a note in the black journal that night. The third piece is the one that almost broke me. It was the spring after my dad died, the 1-year anniversary of his funeral. I had organized a small gathering at the cemetery with a few of his oldest friends from the high school. 6 people, a thermos of coffee, a small bouquet of black-eyed Susans. I had told my mother and my sister about it 3 weeks in advance. Sloane texted me the morning of, 2 hours before, and said, "Tessie, Marcus and I have a couples counseling intake today and we cannot move it. Please give Daddy a kiss for us." I read the text in my car in the parking lot of the cemetery. I sat there for 10 minutes. Then I went and stood by my dad's grave and I read him the entry I had written the night before in the black journal, out loud, very quietly, with the wind in the dogwoods and the smell of cut grass from the groundskeeper's mower. I told him what his older daughter had done at his funeral in case he had not been able to see it from where he was. I told him I was keeping a record. I told him I had not forgotten what he said to me in the garage. Then I drove home. Sloane posted a photo from the couples counseling appointment that night, except it wasn't a couples counseling appointment. It was a wine bar in Indianapolis. Marcus was in the photo laughing with a glass of red in his hand. There was no therapist, there was no intake. There was only my sister, smiling at the camera on the anniversary of the day we buried our father, while 6 people stood around his grave without her. I made the longest entry of all in the black journal that night, and I underlined the date in blue ink 3 times. I want you to know I was not building a case yet. I was just keeping a record. There is a difference. A case is something you build because you have decided to use it. A record is something you keep because you cannot trust yourself to remember things accurately when you are this tired. I had been told my whole life that I was the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the one who exaggerated. I needed proof for myself, not for anyone else. I needed to be able to look at a date and a photograph and a receipt and know that I had not invented any of it. The decision to use the record came later. The record came first. For the next 8 months, I wrote 2 journals. The decoy lived in my nightstand. It contained increasingly dramatic, slightly embarrassing entries about a fake coworker, a fake roommate dispute, a fake credit card debt, and one very long entry about how I felt, less than, my sister, and always had. I wrote that one specifically because I knew it was the entry Sloane would not be able to resist using. The real journal lived in Anne of Green Gables, and it filled up with dates, screenshots, a Marriott receipt I found in Marcus's car when Sloane sent me out to grab her sweater after Easter dinner, and one Polaroid that I took with shaking hands from across the parking lot of Conrad Brennan's funeral, of my sister and the man who would later become her fiancé, sitting in his Ford Escape, her head against his shoulder, his hand on her thigh, 22 minutes after we put my father in the ground. The wedding was set for the second Saturday of October. The rehearsal dinner was the Friday night before, at a place called Montgomery's Steakhouse on the south side of Greenfield. 80 guests, both families, a buffet of glazed pork loin, twice-baked potatoes, and green beans almondine, served on long banquet tables with white linens and small mason jars of black-eyed Susans down the centers. Marcus's parents at the head table. His father, Reginald Hayes, was a regional vice president at First Indiana Bank. His mother, Adele, sat on the board of a regional retail conglomerate that owned, among other things, the parent company of the marketing firm where my sister worked as a director. Adele had a quiet, watchful face and old money jewelry. She had said maybe 100 words to my sister in the entire 18 months they had known each other. Devon Hayes was Marcus's younger sister and the maid of honor. She was 31, a second-grade teacher in Indianapolis, and the person I had quietly become friends with over the previous year, the way two women become friends when they realize they are the only two people in a room who can see what is actually happening. Devon had babysat for Marcus and Sloane 4 separate weekends, while Sloane consoled him after a tough work trip. 3 of those weekends, Marcus had actually been at home, not on a trip at all, and Sloane had been the one who was gone. Devon had figured it out the second time. By the third time, she had started taking screenshots of Sloane's social media check-ins. By the fourth, she had reached out to me through a comment on one of my mother's Facebook posts. We had been talking for almost a year. 2 weeks before the wedding, Devon called me from her classroom during her lunch break. She said, "Tessa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I sat down on my couch. I said, "Okay." She said, "Is your sister sleeping with my brother before the wedding, the way she was sleeping with him before he was even single?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Will you let me see it?" And I said, "Devon, I will do better than that. I will give it to you to hold. Because I think she's going to do something at the rehearsal dinner, and I think the only way to stop her is to let her finish." 3 days before the wedding, I went to Devon's apartment in Fountain Square. I brought a brown paper bag from Panera with 2 soup and salads and an unopened bottle of Pinot Grigio. We sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours. I showed her the real journal. I showed her the screenshots. I showed her the Marriott receipt. I showed her the Polaroid from the funeral parking lot. She looked at each piece for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, okay, okay." And then she said, "I want to be the one to show this to my parents. Not at the dinner, the morning after. In their living room, with Marcus there. I want him to watch our mother read every page." I asked her if she was sure. She said, "Tessa, my brother has been lying to a woman named Brielle for years, and now he's been lying to my parents for 2 years. The wedding is bigger than the lie. If my mother sees this in her living room with the wedding still ahead, she'll bury it. She'll pay it off. She'll make it go away because she will not survive the embarrassment in public. But if Sloane does what you think she's going to do at the rehearsal dinner, my mother will see it for what it is, and my father will see it. And then we hand them the file the next morning, and they will know that this was never a misunderstanding. This was a campaign." I said, "What if she doesn't do anything at the rehearsal dinner? What if she behaves?" Devon smiled the smallest smile I had ever seen on a human face. She said, "Tessa, you and I both know your sister is incapable of going an entire night without standing up and pulling something out of her purse to read. I put money on it. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever stayed quiet for years while someone you loved was lied about, knowing that the only way to protect them was to let the lie keep growing until it was big enough to fall on its own weight? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Because this story is about to turn. Friday night came. I drove out to Montgomery's Steakhouse in my old Honda Civic with 178,000 miles on it, wearing a navy blue sheath dress and the small gold studs my grandma Maeve gave me at my high school graduation. I had the decoy journal in my own purse. I had been carrying it around with me for the entire week because I knew Sloane had been staying over at my apartment to help me get ready, and I was not going to leave anything in my nightstand for her to find at the last minute. The real journal was in Devon's clutch, a small beaded thing, the color of champagne, sitting on the table between her bread plate and her water goblet. The room at Montgomery's was beautiful in the way that rented event rooms in mid-priced steakhouses are beautiful. Dark wood paneling, brass sconces with low amber bulbs, a long head table on a slight riser at the front, and 4 banquet tables stretching back into the room. 80 people in suits and dresses, the smell of roasted garlic and warm rolls, a small bouquet of black-eyed Susans on every table because my mother had insisted, even though Adele Hayes had wanted white roses, and my mother had said black-eyed Susans were Connie's favorite. We're not going to forget Connie at this dinner. It was the only thing my mother had won in the entire wedding planning process, and she had won it because she had said it through tears. Marcus was at the head table in a charcoal suit. Sloane was beside him in a champagne pink dress with a deep neckline and her hair in a long, loose wave. Devon was on Marcus's other side. Adele and Reginald were at the head table too, with my mother on Reginald's other side. I was at the second table, with my Aunt Kathleen and her husband Vern and a few of my mother's church friends. The first hour was small talk and salads and wine. Sloane was loud and warm and exhausting, the way she always was. She kept laughing too hard at jokes that were not jokes. She kept touching Marcus's hand. She kept catching my eye across the room and giving me the look I had known since I was 12. Then, about 20 minutes after the salad plates had been cleared and the entrees had not yet arrived, Sloane stood up. She was holding a small leather journal in her hand. The decoy. She had pulled it from my apartment that morning when she had stopped by to grab her hair stuff. I had left the decoy in the nightstand drawer specifically for her to find. I had even refreshed the most recent entry the night before, with a long, weepy passage about how I had always envied her and how I had once, briefly, in college, considered confessing to a guy I knew she liked just to level the playing field. I had never been to college with anyone, Sloane knew. There was no guy. The entry was a detonator I had been planting for months. Sloane tapped her water glass with a butter knife. The room quieted. She smiled at the head table. She smiled at her in-laws. She smiled at my mother. She did not smile at me. She said, "Hi, everyone. I know it's not really my place to do a toast tonight. That's tomorrow. But I want to do something a little different. My sister Tessie and I have always had a complicated relationship, and I want to take a minute to honor her in front of all of you the way she deserves." My Aunt Kathleen patted my hand under the table. She said, "Oh, that's so sweet." I did not move. I did not speak. I watched. Sloane opened the journal. She said, "I borrowed this from my sister's apartment this morning, with permission. She knows I'm doing this." She looked at me and gave me a wink that the entire room could see. My mother let out a small giggle. Adele Hayes did not move. Reginald Hayes set down his water glass very slowly. Devon, beside Marcus, looked across the room at me, and I gave her the smallest nod I have ever given anyone. Sloane began to read. She read the passage about the fake guy in college. She read it slowly. She added little dramatic flourishes. She gave it a voice, a high, wavering, weepy voice. That was supposed to be mine. The room laughed in some places and went quiet in others. My mother laughed the loudest, because my mother always laughs at whatever Sloane is doing, especially when she does not understand it. I watched my Aunt Kathleen's smile fade. I watched the church friends stop chewing. Sloane flipped a page. She read another entry, one about how I had never felt as pretty as her. One about how I had cried at a high school dance because no one had asked me to slow dance with them. One about how I had, allegedly, stolen a pair of her earrings in 8th grade and worn them to a party where I knew she would see them. None of these things had ever happened. I had written every single one of them 8 months ago in the kitchen of my apartment with a black pen and a cup of cold coffee, knowing exactly what tonight would look like. The room was no longer laughing. There is a particular silence that falls in a room of 80 people when they begin to realize they are not at the entertainment they thought they were at. It is the silence of forks being set down very gently on plates. It is the silence of women catching their husbands' eyes. It is the silence of a mother who has stopped patting her daughter's hand under the table. Sloane was building to something. I could feel it. I had known her my whole life, and I knew what her face looked like when she was about to deliver what she thought was a kill shot. She turned another page. She paused for effect. She said, "And this is the one I really wanted to share, because I think it explains so much about why my sister has been so cold to me through this whole wedding planning process." She took a breath. She looked at me. She read, She read an entry in a slow voice in which the fake me, the me Sloane believed existed, confessed that I had always been in love with Marcus, that I had cried for weeks when they got engaged, that I sometimes, on bad nights, fantasized about objecting at the wedding. The room went absolutely still. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Adele Hayes's eyes shifted from Sloane to me, to Marcus, to Devon in the space of about 2 seconds. Reginald Hayes's jaw did something I had never seen a jaw do in real life. Marcus's face went the color of skim milk. I had never written that entry. I had never written anything close to it. Sloane was making it up on the spot in front of 80 witnesses, holding a journal she believed was mine, fabricating a confession from a sister she had decided to humiliate. She had gotten greedy. She had thought she had a free shot, and she had taken one too many. She was reading from a book she had never even opened until that morning, and she had drifted from the actual entries into the entries she had always wanted to find. That was the moment Devon Hayes stood up. She did not say anything at first. She walked the length of the head table slowly in her champagne-colored heels with her champagne-colored clutch in her hand. The room watched her walk. She stopped beside her brother. She looked at Sloane. She said, in a voice that was perfectly level, the kind of voice a second-grade teacher uses when she wants the entire class to know she is not raising her volume on purpose, "Sloane, stop talking. Sit down." Sloane laughed. She said, "Devon, sweetie, it's okay, it's just a little." Devon said, "Sit. Down." Sloane sat down. Devon turned to the room. She said, "I'm so sorry to everyone here. There's been a misunderstanding, and we're going to take a short break before dinner is served. Mom, Dad, Marcus, Tessa, Aunt Kathleen, will you please come with me to the side room for 10 minutes?" She looked at my mother. She said, "Rita, you should come too." My mother stood up shaking. Marcus stood up very slowly. Reginald and Adele stood up together. I stood up. My Aunt Kathleen stood up. Sloane stayed in her chair, looking from face to face, the decoy journal still open in her hands, her mouth slightly parted, the smile she had been wearing for 40 minutes finally beginning to slide off her face. The side room at Montgomery's is a small private dining space with a round table and a credenza along one wall. There were 8 of us in there. Devon shut the door behind us. She set her champagne clutch on the round table. She unsnapped it. She removed the slim black leather journal with the gold corners. She set it on the table. She said, "Mom, Dad, Marcus." The journal Sloane just read from is not Tessa's real journal. It is a decoy that Tessa has been keeping for 8 months because she knew this was coming. This is her real journal. I have read it. I have verified the dates and the screenshots. I would like all of you to read it before we go back into that room. My mother said, "What is happening?" She said it with no question mark in her voice. Marcus said, "Devon, what are you doing?" His voice cracked. Adele Hayes did not say a word. She picked up the journal. She opened it. She read the first entry. August 7th, 2022, out loud in the same level voice her daughter had just used. She read it slowly. She read the date. She read the location. She read the names. She turned the page. She read the next entry. She kept reading. The Marriott receipt fell out of the journal onto the table. She picked it up. She read the date on it. She read the next entry. She turned the page. The Polaroid fell out. She picked it up. She studied it. She turned it over. She read what I had written on the back of it in pencil. Funeral, August 7th, 2022. 22 minutes after Connie went in the ground. She set the Polaroid down on the table face up. She looked at her son. She said, "Marcus, sit down. We're going to talk. I want to take a moment here before I tell you what happened in the next 48 hours. Has someone in your family ever tried to rewrite who you are in front of an audience because they couldn't bear who you actually were in private? Tell me below." I read every single one. Marcus sat down. Reginald Hayes sat down. Adele kept standing. Devon stayed by the door. My mother sat down very carefully, the way you sit down when your knees have stopped working, but you are pretending they have not. My Aunt Kathleen, God bless her, kept her hand on my mother's shoulder the entire time and did not say a word. Adele said, Marcus, look at me. Did you sleep with Tessa's sister at your father's funeral? Marcus said, It was Connie's funeral, not Dad's. Adele said, I am aware whose funeral it was, Marcus. Did you sleep with her that day? Marcus said, Mom? It wasn't like that. Adele said, Marcus, did you sleep with her? The day they buried that man, whose daughter you are about to marry tomorrow? Look at me. Marcus did not answer for a long time. Then he said, Yes. The room did the thing rooms do when a wall comes down. There is no sound. There is just a change in pressure, the way the air in a kitchen changes when an oven door opens. My mother did not cry. She put her hand over her own mouth. Reginald Hayes did not move. Adele put the journal down very carefully in the center of the round table. She turned to me. She said, Tessa, I want to apologize. I have spent 2 years thinking you were a cold and difficult young woman. I see now that you were a careful one. I am very sorry. I said, Adele, it's okay. You didn't know. She said, I know. That is why I am apologizing. She turned to Devon. She said, Sweetheart, thank you. You have done a hard thing tonight, and you have done it well. She turned to Reginald. She said, Reggie, wedding's off. You'll handle the venue. I'll handle the bank. And I will handle Sloane's employer in the morning. Reginald Hayes nodded once. He did not speak. Adele turned back to my mother. She said, Rita, I'm going to go back into that room and I'm going to tell our guests that there has been a family emergency and that the dinner is concluded. I am going to do that with as much dignity as I can give it, for your sake and for your husband's sake. I am not going to embarrass your daughter publicly tonight. That is a kindness I am giving you, not her. Do you understand me? My mother nodded. She was looking at the table. Adele said, Rita, look at me. My mother looked up. Adele said, Your other daughter saved every one of us tonight. I want you to know that. We did not go back to the main room together. Adele went first. Reginald followed her. Marcus went last, by himself, the way a man walks when he has just understood that the next 10 years of his life have been moved without his permission. Devon stayed with me and my mother and my Aunt Kathleen in the side room. We sat at the round table. Nobody spoke. From the other side of the door, we heard Adele Hayes address the room of 80 in a clear, calm, public voice, the way a woman who sits on 3 boards addresses a room. We heard her thank everyone for coming. We heard her say there had been a family matter. We heard her say there would be no wedding tomorrow. We heard the silence. We heard the chairs scraping. We heard, eventually, the front doors of Montgomery's open and close over and over as 80 people walked out into the parking lot in the cool October night. We heard one set of high heels run past our door and out into the lobby. That was Sloane. She did not come find me that night. She did not come find my mother. She got in her car and she drove to Marcus's apartment, and she discovered the doorman would not let her up because Marcus had already called down. So she drove to my mother's house, and she let herself in with her key, and she sat on my mother's couch, and she waited. My mother did not go home that night. My mother came home with me to my apartment above the bakery on Walnut Street, and she slept in my bed, and I slept on the couch, and at some point around 5 in the morning, I heard her crying very quietly into my pillow, and I did not get up because I did not know what to say to her yet. In the morning, my mother sat up in my bed, and she looked at me across the room, and she said, Tess, how long did you know? I said, Since the funeral. She said, Why didn't you tell me? I said, Because you would not have believed me, and because I knew that the only person who could end this for good was Adele Hayes. And I knew that Adele Hayes would only believe Sloane if she saw her with her own eyes, in a room of her own friends, doing it on purpose. My mother was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, Your father told me when he was sick that you were the strong one. I told him he was wrong. I told him Sloane was the strong one. He said, No, Rita, Tess is the one who plans. Sloane is the one who performs. You have to learn the difference. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She said, I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry I never learned it. The next 48 hours were what Adele Hayes had promised they would be, executed with the cold efficiency of a woman who had spent 30 years on the boards of regional companies. By Saturday afternoon, the venue had been canceled, the deposit had been refunded to the Hayes family minus a forfeiture fee, and the caterer had been informed. By Sunday morning, Reginald Hayes had called the personal banker who had co-signed Sloane's condo down payment on his recommendation, and that loan had been called due in 30 days. Sloane could not refinance it on her own income, and she could not sell the condo in 30 days. By Monday afternoon, Adele Hayes had forwarded a 12-page summary of the journal. Names, dates, screenshots, a copy of the Marriott receipt, a copy of the funeral, Polaroid, to the head of HR at the parent company of the marketing firm where my sister worked. Sloane had a morality clause in her director-level contract. The clause was specifically about romantic conduct involving clients or vendors. Marcus's family's company was not a client of Sloane's firm directly, but the parent company of Sloane's firm did approximately $4 million a year in business with one of Adele's other boards. By Tuesday morning, my sister was unemployed. Marcus moved out of the apartment they shared on Wednesday. He filed for an annulment of their newly recorded engagement contract. They had filed for a marriage license and had a prenup that had specific provisions about misrepresentation by the following Monday. He did not call my sister. He did not text my sister. Devon told me later that he had not spoken to Sloane since the moment Adele had said his name in the side room at Montgomery's. Sloane called me 41 times in the first week. I answered on the 11th call. I said, "Yes." She said, "Tessa, you did this. You set this up. You set me up." I said, "Sloane, I wrote a journal. You stole it. You read it in front of 80 people. You made up entries that did not exist. None of those things were me." She said, "You knew I would steal it." I said, "I did." She said, "That is a trap." I said, "Sloane, a trap is something you walk into when somebody's pushing you. You walked in by yourself." She said, "Mom hates me." I said, "Mom doesn't hate you. Mom is in mourning." She said, "For Daddy?" I said, "For you." She hung up. She has called me twice since. Both times I have answered. Both times she has said the same thing in different words, that I planned this, that I orchestrated this, that I am the cold one, the cruel one, the one Daddy never really loved. Both times I have listened, and both times I have said, "Sloane, you can think whatever you need to think. I have to go now." And I have hung up the phone, and I have made a cup of black coffee, and I have sat at my kitchen table, and I have not felt triumphant. I want to be very clear about that. I do not feel triumphant. People keep asking me if I feel vindicated, and I do not have a word for what I feel. It is closer to tired than to anything else. It is closer to clean. It is the way you feel after you finally finish a load of laundry that has been sitting in the dryer for 3 days. It is not joy. It is the absence of a thing that was pressing on your chest. My mother and I have lunch every Sunday now at her kitchen table on Mulberry Street. She makes pot roast in the same Pyrex casserole dish that my grandma Maid gave her at her bridal shower in 1978, and she puts out the cloth napkins my dad bought her one Christmas at a Cracker Barrel in Tennessee. She doesn't talk about Sloane very much. When she does, she talks about her in the past tense, the way you talk about somebody who has moved very far away. I don't correct her. Sloane has moved very far away. She sold the condo at a loss. She moved to Cincinnati. She is, last I heard, working in social media marketing for a regional car dealership. She does not call our mother. Aunt Kathleen called me last month on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. She said, "Tessie, I owe you an apology. For 30 years, every time you said something about your sister, I told you to be the bigger person. I told you she didn't mean it. I told you that's just how Sloane is. I should have listened to you. I should have listened to your father." I said, "Aunt Kath, it's okay. You couldn't have known," she said. "Honey, I could have. I just didn't want to." That was the apology I needed. I will keep it for the rest of my life. 2 weekends after that call, my Aunt Kathleen drove down from Fort Wayne with a pan of her chicken and noodles and a brown grocery bag full of things from her attic. She set the bag on my mother's kitchen table on Mulberry Street, and she pulled out 3 items, one at a time. The gold horseshoe necklace from my grandma Maeve, the one Sloane had been wearing at the chili dinner. A small ceramic bird, identical to the one on my dresser, that my dad had bought my aunt at the same Brown County yard sale in 1996, and a folded piece of paper, soft and yellow, that my dad had handed her at his 60th birthday party a few weeks before his diagnosis. Aunt Kathleen unfolded the paper with both hands. It was a list, in my dad's careful pencil handwriting, of things he wanted Aunt Kathleen to do for me if anything ever happened to him. Item 1. Make sure Tess knows the necklace is hers. Item 2. Make sure Tess knows the bird on her dresser is real. The one in Aunt Kath's attic is the spare. Item 3. Make sure Tess knows the journal is hers, both of them, always. Item 4. Make sure Tess understands that Sloane will come for everything eventually, and that I knew it, and that I prepared for it. Item 5. Tell her I am sorry I did not say it out loud. Tell her I should have. Tell her she was the strong one and her sister was the loud one, and I knew the difference. My Aunt Kathleen handed me the list. She said, "Tessie, he gave this to me at his birthday party. He said, Kath, when the time comes, you'll know." I did not know. I'm sorry I did not know. I'm telling you now. I read the list 3 times. I folded it. I put it in my purse. I did not cry until I got back to my own apartment that night. Devon and I still have lunch every other Sunday at Patachou in Indianapolis, the kind of brunch place where they put orange marmalade in little glass jars on the table, and the waitress remembers that I drink my coffee black. Marcus is in therapy. Devon tells me he is doing the work, slowly. He has reached out to his ex-fiancée Brielle to apologize. She has accepted the apology and asked him not to contact her again. He has respected that. Adele Hayes sends me a Christmas card every year now, hand-addressed, with a check for $100 inside, written out to Tessa Brennan with gratitude. I do not cash the checks. I keep them in a small wooden box on my dresser, beside the small ceramic bird my dad bought me at a yard sale in Brown County when I was 12. I want to tell you something my father taught me in the garage that spring that I did not understand for almost 20 years. He did not say, "Always keep 2 of everything important," because he was teaching me about diaries or about sisters or even about people who steal from you. He said it because he had lived a long, quiet, careful life, and he had figured out the one true thing about being underestimated. The one true thing is this: the people who have decided you are nothing will always reach for the obvious version of you. They will steal the journal in the nightstand. They will read the diary on the pillow. They will assume that what they can find is all there is. The version of you they cannot find is the one that survives. Real love does not test you to prove you deserve it. Real love prepares the ground under your feet so that when somebody finally tries to push you, you do not fall. My father did not give me money. He did not give me a house. He did not give me anything I could put on a resume. He gave me a sentence in a garage in 1996, and he trusted me to grow up into a woman who would understand it. Peace does not come from revenge. Peace comes from standing on something solid that somebody who loved you built years ago, and knowing for the first time in your life that you do not have to apologize for being the one who saw clearly. If you could protect one thing in your life, a place, a person, a promise, a memory, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I read them on my couch at night with a cup of black coffee. And I think about all of you out there, the careful ones, the quiet ones, the ones who have been keeping a second of everything important. And I want you to know something. You are not paranoid. You are not dramatic. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. If this one stayed with you, the story on your screen right now belongs in the same drawer. A sister sued her 2 weeks after they buried their mother, and the USB drive in her pocket answered in their mother's voice. Tap the card.